Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Desert. I am Walter Gendell, and I am thrilled to be your worship associate this morning. But before we begin, please take a moment to silence your cell phones. Thank you. So as we begin our service, I think it is important that we continue to acknowledge that we gather today on the unceded lands of the Aqua Caliente Band of Cahuilla people, and that we also strongly commit to grow in our understanding and relationship with this land and with the people who inhabited it and nurtured it before our arrival. In this congregation, we strive to honor the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And what that means to all of you is that all of you are welcomed. You are welcomed no matter your sexual orientation or gender identity, your age or your size, whether you are rich or whether you are poor. You are welcomed regardless of your race, religion, or culture, wherever you come from and whomever you love. We welcome all those who will learn and grow with us as we commit together to embrace the rich and beautiful diversity of the world. I invite all of you to help build a community centered in justice, in compassion, and in love. We are glad you are with us this morning, whether you are here in the sanctuary or at home. We are very grateful for your presence. And again, welcome, and please join us for coffee after our service. If you want to learn more about us or our programming, please contact the office at admin, ADMIN, at uucod.org or visit our website. And now, please join me as Reverend Ian rings the Tibetan bowl and we listen to the wonderful Malcolm Swan play our music for centering.
Good morning. I am Reverend Ian Riddell, and I have the delight and joy and honor of being the minister of this congregation. Welcome on this tropical day. Come one, come all. Come with your missing pieces and your extra screws. Come with your hard edges and your soft spots. Come with your bowed heads and your upright spines. Come all you flamboyant and drab, verbose and quiet, fidgeting and lethargic. All you with large vision and tender hearts, all you with small courage and tender fears. Bring your lisp and your stutter and your song. Bring your gravel and your drawl and your lilt. Bring your anger and your joy and your righteous indignation, misfits and conformists and everyone in between. Come into this space and be welcome. Bring who you are. Bring where you've traveled. Bring what you've learned. Bring what you long for. And let us worship together. We're going to begin our worship today by singing together our opening hymn, There's a River Flowing in My Soul. And as we sing this, I'd invite you to remember where this song came from. The culture and the people of this song comes from our nation's history of oppression, comes from our culture and our nation's denial of humanity, of millions and millions of people. And so these words are healing, self-healing words, and they are also defiant and justice-seeking words. Will you rise, please, in body or spirit as we sing, There's a River Flowing in My Soul.
And
So now we'd like to light the chalice and say our unison aspiration. So as Reverend Ian lights our chalice, please join me in the words which you can see on the screens. May love be the spirit of this church. May the quest for truth be its sacrament and service be its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, and to help one another in fellowship. This is our aspiration. And I'd like to welcome Ruben up, if he can please join us, to light our BIPOC candle. We light these candles in solidarity with Black, Indigenous, and other people of color as we journey together towards spiritual wholeness. May we, as a beloved community, work to dismantle racism and all forms of oppression. May we live out our principles so that justice, dignity, and equity for all prevail. Thank you, Ruben. So our reading this morning is from Brené Brown, Listening to Shame. Brené Brown is an American professor, social worker, author, and podcast host, and is known for her work on shame, vulnerability, and leadership. This reading is from her TED Talk from 2014. There's a great quote that saved me this past year by Theodore Roosevelt. A lot of people refer to it as the man in the arena quote, and it goes like this. It is not the critic who counts. It is not the man who sits and points out how the doer of deeds could have done things better and how he falls and stumbles. The credit goes to the man in the arena, whose face is marred with dust and blood and sweat. But when he's in the arena, at best he wins, and at worst he loses. But when he fails, when he loses, he does so daring greatly. That's what life is about daring greatly, about being in the arena. When you walk up to that arena and you put your hand on the door and you think, I'm going in, I'm going to try this, shame is the gremlin who says, you're not good enough. You don't think you're pretty enough, or smart enough, or talented enough, or powerful enough. And if we can quiet it down and still walk in and say, I'm going to do this, we look up and the critic that we see pointing and laughing 99% of the time is who? Ourselves. Shame drives two big tapes, never good enough, and if you can talk it out of that one, who do you think you are? The thing to understand about shame is that it is not guilt. Shame is a focus on self. Guilt is a focus on behavior. Shame is, I am bad. Guilt is, I did something bad. How many of you, if you did something that was hurtful, would be willing to say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake? How many of you would be willing to say that? Guilt, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Shame, I'm sorry, I am a mistake. If we're going to find our way back to each other, vulnerability is going to be that path. And I know it's seductive to stand outside the arena and think to yourself, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to kick some ass when I'm bulletproof and when I'm perfect. And that is very seductive. But the truth is, that never happens. I mean, even if you got as perfect as you could and as bulletproof as you could possibly muster when you got in there, that's not what we want to see. We want you to go in. We want to be with you and across from you. And we just want for ourselves and the people we care about and the people we work with to dare greatly. So this is now the part of our service where I invite the ushers forward for our collection. Please help support the important work of our church and give as generously as you can.
Thank you all for your generous support for the ongoing work of this congregation and its work in the world, the work of building the beloved community here and a world of kindness and love and justice. Thank you for your generosity. And if you're there online, you have a link you can click on in the email that came to you this morning, and you can also take part in that generosity. Thank you. This is the time in our service where we share the joys and sorrows of our community, those things which we bring in with us, those things on our heart, on our mind, those things that we carry in our spirit and in our body, we bring them here together. And some of those things we share out loud, some we keep in the quiet of our hearts and minds. These are the joys and sorrows shared with us today. These are the joys that we share out loud today, and we know, as I said, there are some that remain in the quiet of our hearts, either too small to feel ready to be spoken yet, or too overwhelming to allow us to say them out loud. And so we take some time now to share those quietly and silently with ourselves in the confines of our hearts as we gather in quiet today. Will you join me for a time of prayer and contemplation? Spirit of life, source of love, fire of our broken but still shining hearts, we have gathered again together on this day of humidity and heat, this day of deep summer. We have come together here to be in this place with one another, to share in laughter and in tears, to hear each other's voices and see the sparkle in each other's eyes, to offer hands of support and greeting and possibility. And so we gather in this space, breathing this air together. We are grateful for this opportunity to be here with each other, grateful for we know that the world around us is full of so much that could claim our attention, so much news and politics and warfare and strife and celebration and triumph all around us that pulls at our hearts and our eyes and our attention. And we choose to pause here, take that all in, to pause in quiet so that we can hear and feel the still small voice, the river that runs through us, that reminds us that in the midst of all of that chaos, in the midst of all of that noise, we are one. We breathe the same air, and we share the same love that nurtures and holds us all. So we pause here together for quiet. Not to stop, not to run away, but to pause, to regather ourselves, to remind ourselves that we are not alone, to remind ourselves that as we return to the work of the world in a little while, the work of building peace, the work of building trust and hope and possibility, reminder that we are not alone. We hold in our hearts all those today who suffer from warfare and violence. We hold them in our hearts and wish for them safety and health and security and possibility instead of bombs and fear. We hold in our hearts all of the leaders of our world, of this nation, of other nations. We hold them in our hearts and hope for them, understanding, hope for them that they can see the faces of the people they govern, see the faces of people they make decisions about, see and hear the voices of those who are oppressed, who are damaged, who are frightened, who are struggling. See and hear the faces and the people and the souls that they have impact on, and that they will choose kindness, that they will choose justice, that they will choose peace and an end to violence. We hold all of these things in our hearts as we pay attention to what goes on in our own lives, the lives of our nation, the life of the world. So we gather here today in quiet, held by the love that enlivens us, the love that gives us possibility and hope, the love that brings peace to all. We pause in the quiet of that love. May all beings know peace. May all beings know an end to suffering. May all beings know love. Friends, will you join your voices as we sing together our hymns for meditation, Spirit of Life and Fuente de Amor. I don't know about you, but one of the things that this heat, this humidity makes me want to do is cocoon, is stay inside. If it weren't for the dogs, I think I might not go outside in weather like this sometimes. But I stay inside and I think and ponder, and you watch TV and read a book or talk to your spouse or partner or talk to the dogs. If you have dogs, you talk to the dogs all the time. But think about and ponder the stories of your life, things that have happened to you and how you feel about them and how they might feel differently now than they did at the time. And so I want to, today, as we talk about shame and Brené Brown, I want to start with a story about my life. Again, I tell you these stories not because I think my life is spectacular and worthy of attention above all else, but because I want to invite you to ponder the events, the stories of your life in similar ways. This is a story about my path to professional ministry, a story about my journey toward growth and wholeness. It was January of 2010. I was in Chicago in the middle of my second year in the Master's of Divinity degree at Meadville Lombard Theological School. Now, during the fall and spring, we had regular semester-long classes, but in January, what we called J-term, we had week-long intensives. And it was a time of the year when the students during the modified residency programs, the students who were distance students, would all come together and join the residential students on campus in Chicago in January for classes and worship and connection. Now, the class I was taking was called Walking the Talk, Communicating Across Cultural Differences. It was about working to understand the assumptions, values, and preferences of ourselves and other human beings, and to use that understanding to be able to craft conversations and relationships of deeper understanding, to build bridges. It's where I first encountered the book Crucial Conversations, which I've used in a couple of classes with you folks over the years. I remember one conversation one morning where I was challenged to confront some expectations and assumptions that I had and that I was living out about polite behavior and courtesy, things I assumed to be universal that I felt justified in assuming were universal, and I was called on it. I don't remember the specifics, I remember the feeling. Clearly, kindly, and appropriately called on it, though I didn't feel the kindness or the appropriateness in that moment. That day I felt anger. I felt frustration and confusion, and I felt shame. I felt my jaw tighten. I felt my cheeks flushing warm and red, and I felt the sensation of the floor dropping away beneath my feet. Now, I knew that I wasn't as far along in my own work and growth in cultural competence and doing the work of anti-racism. I knew this, and I felt shame because of it, especially in that moment on that day. No one was shaming me, I want to tell you, but I felt shame. And I shut down for the remainder of that class session. I kind of withdrew. I didn't participate in conversation, and when the time came for our lunch break, I ducked out of the room quickly and quietly and headed toward the cafe down this road all on my own. One of my classmates caught up with me, another white man, and he walked with me and asked me to talk with me a bit, and I said yes, which was unusual for me at the time. He offered me the opportunity to share my frustration with him. And he shared parts of his own journey in this work. And it helped a bit, a lot actually, as it turned out, but I couldn't really see and feel it then. I did finish out the class that week, but I carried that shame with me for a long while after. It made me a little quieter, a little less willing to speak up in class for a while, a little less willing to try. It was only after a long time had passed that I was able to understand and name what I was feeling as shame. I was angry, I was hurt, I was worried about my future, but I was only later, after some years of therapy and encountering the work of Brené Brown, honestly, that I was able to identify what I was experiencing then as shame. Now, as Walter mentioned, Brené Brown is a social worker, a researcher, professor, author, and podcaster who has gained a very well-earned reputation lately for her work on the ways in which our emotions and our expectations of ourselves and others get in the way of our flourishing, get in the way of vulnerability, get in the way of our relationships flourishing. And a while ago, I shared with you some of her more recent work and writing about rumbling with the struggle and rising stronger. Some of you may remember that from a few weeks ago. If you took my class on perfectionism a couple of years ago, we talked about her work as well, and I'll be coming back to that perfectionism work in the months ahead. But today I want to talk about some of her earliest public work. As Walter mentioned, there were TED Talks, you may have seen them, on vulnerability and shame. If you haven't, all you need to do is go to YouTube and type in Brené Brown and shame, and they'll pop up. The words that Walter shared with us, as he said, came from one of those TED Talks. She began her career as an academic researcher studying vulnerability and shame in an environment where people said, "You're going to study what?" And she began to share these findings that she had in the work in those TED Talks and in her first book, which was called "I Thought It Was Just Me, But It Isn't," making the journey from what will people think to I am enough. And I really do recommend this in any of her works. It really is not, it's not airport bookstore level self-help stuff. It's really deep researched work. In this book, she shares her deep understanding, based on hundreds and hundreds of interviews and other research, that shame is at the heart of so many of the things that get in the way of us thriving and crafting rich and connected lives and relationships. It is shame, she says, that holds us back, shame that causes us pain, shame that gets in the way of our flourishing. I wonder if you notice, as I say the word shame over and over again, notice the physical reaction your body is having to thinking about shame. Brené Brown, over her years, first in that book and then throughout many further years of research, has come up with this definition for shame. Shame is the intensely painful feeling or experiencing of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love, belonging, and connection. Let me say that again. Shame is the intensely painful feeling or experiencing of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love, belonging, and connection. She says there are 3 truths about shame. We all have it. She says if anything is universal to human experience, it's the experience of feeling shame. We experience it differently. Those physical sensations I shared with you about how I felt when I felt shame may not be how you feel, but I think we all feel shame. We are afraid to talk about it. And the third one is the less we talk about it, the more control it has over us. It hates being spoken aloud. She says we do not talk about shame, we experience it. We feel it. We sometimes live with it for an entire lifetime, but we don't talk about it. Shame for her grows from expectations about who we should be, what we should be, how we should be. It grows in those oughts. I ought to, we ought to, I should, those places. And it's all about fear, it says. We are biologically, emotionally, socially, and cognitively wired for connection as human beings. For many of us, there is also a deep need for spiritual connection. Shame, she says, is about the fear of disconnection. If I'm not smart enough, thin enough, beautiful enough, successful enough, right enough, charming enough, loyal enough, fast enough, education enough, social enough, you can add your enoughs to that, then I will lose connection with those who love me, those who I need. I will be alone. This is shame. Researchers Jean Baker Miller and Irene Stiver write, we believe that the most terrifying and destructive feeling that a person can experience is psychological isolation. That would be why solitary confinement is such a horrible punishment. This is not the same as being alone, though. It is a feeling that one is locked out of the possibility of human connection and of being powerless to change the situation. So it's universal. Everybody deals with it. And unfortunately, there is no pill. There is no once and for all cure. It's an ongoing reality of human life. We have to live with it. So what do we do? Think for yourself about how you feel for a moment. Don't frighten yourself. But just think for a moment, stay in your head if you want. Think for a moment about how you respond when you feel shame. Perhaps you shut down. Perhaps you stop communicating. Perhaps you get angry and lash out. Perhaps you choose another way to be, but shame triggers some of those behaviors in ourselves, behaviors that ironically increase disconnection. So because shame is something we all encounter all the time, we all experience, Brené Brown invites us to work to grow what she calls shame resilience, the ability to recognize it when we experience it and move through it in a constructive way. One practice that helps build shame resilience, she says, is empathy. For Brown, that is the strongest antidote for shame. We can learn to practice empathy with our neighbors and our kin rather than judging or dismissal. It helps us build connection, empathy. Not sympathy, not I know exactly what you're feeling, but empathy. I can imagine what it's like to be in another person's shoes. Provide them space and kindness, empathy. And harshly judging ourselves, not having empathy with ourselves, will make it harder and harder to be in relationship with each other. So empathy is an umbrella of response to shame. There are 4 elements that Brené Brown lays out as elements of shame resilience. The first is recognizing it, recognizing shame. This is shame that I'm feeling. What triggered it? What are the things that cause us to go into a shame place? What are the things? They're different for each of us. But what does my body do? How does it feel when I felt shame? So for me, lockjaw, blush, but maybe different for you. This is awareness that that's shame that I'm feeling. The second one is practicing critical awareness. Where did this feeling come from? Are the things that I'm saying about or believing about myself in my head reasonable or real? That's awareness. But critical awareness is also to ask, who does it serve that I feel shame about this? We think about body shame, about feeling shame about our bodies. Who does it serve that I feel shame about my body? Does it serve the diet industry, the fashion industry, the makeup industry, cosmetic surgery? Who does it serve that I feel shame about my body? The third element of shame resilience is reaching out. Shame does not like being heard or talked about. Building your web of connections. Who can you go to share your story and be met with empathy? Be met with connections. How do you build those connections? And the fourth one is simply speaking shame, getting comfortable talking about it and asking for help. So recognizing it, practicing critical awareness, reaching out and speaking about it, speaking shame. So when I use this lens to look back on my experience that January in Chicago, I can see clearly the ways in which shame was at work and the ways in which I was just starting to unwind what had wrapped itself around my heart. So to recognizing shame, when I look back now, I can clearly see how what I was experiencing was shame. I can see how my need to be perfect, to be right, led me to shame when my assumptions and correctness were challenged. I can remember the way my body felt in those moments, things I now know to look for as signs that what I'm feeling is shame. Practicing critical awareness. When I look back now, I can see how the messages that were driving me, perfectionism, correctness, assumptions that my culture and practices were and should be universal, fear that I wasn't capable of change, those messages were driving my shame. I can see and question those messages and their assumptions now. I can work to do what I shared with you a couple of weeks ago and stop and breathe and make choices about how to respond because I am aware. And I can wonder to myself, who benefits that shame shuts me down about this way? And then reaching out. I started reaching out that day. I let my classmate comfort me. I let him provide some context for his own experience in the work. But I'll be honest, I didn't talk about this with anybody else at the time. Not other classmates, not my husband, not our roommate, no one else. I didn't invite anyone else into my figuring this out. And so it took a long time. Nowadays, I know the worth of reaching out to my network of support, my friends and colleagues and coach and therapist. I have learned from that experience because it shut me down for a long time afterward. And then speaking shame. I am telling you this story. Speaking about shame not so that you can feel bad for me, please don't, but so that you can know that you are not alone when you feel shame and that there are ways to work through it. It's okay to ask for what you need when you need it. It's okay to not keep secrets about stuff. We talk in this congregation about discerning what our work is in the world, about living into and living out our values to craft a kinder, more just, and more love-filled world. We care about how we treat each other as we do that work. We care so much that we create covenants and right relations policies and procedures to help guide us in living this beloved community together. If you remember back to the sermon I shared on Brené Brown's work about struggle and rising strong, I shared these words of hers. There are too many people today, she said, who instead of feeling hurt are acting out their hurt. Instead of acknowledging pain, they're inflicting that pain on others. We do this work so that we can be in relationship more honestly and more intentionally and more lovingly, so that we see and know ourselves clearly enough to understand where our reactions to what's happening in our world, our reactions to what's happening in our relationship, where they're coming from. I reflected on Keith Jarrett, the piano player, and the horrible piano he was faced with, and with which he crafted one of the most beloved concerts ever. When we don't see and acknowledge our own challenges and grief, when we don't see the limits of the instrument we have been given to play, we may not be skillful or loving to those we are interacting with, to those we're in relationship with. I remember a guest on Krista Tippett's podcast, On Being, sharing a story about a company they found themselves working in. Things were mostly good there, but there was one coworker who was awful. Rude, aggressive, sometimes verbally abusive, not at all supportive of those that they worked with. And so the person who shared the story talked about talking to the person who was the supervisor, and the supervisor of the awful coworker, the same person, about the behavior of this coworker. The supervisor listened curiously and agreed that something needed to be done about the behavior, that they would look into things, and that there was a plan already working in place to work on this issue. So not excusing the behavior at all. But then the supervisor surprised the worker who had complained by saying, all of that is true and necessary, and we will be dealing with it. But I want you to think about something else as well. If they're talking to other people like that, think about how they're talking to themselves. We need to deal with shame because it hurts us. We need to deal with shame because it encourages us to isolation instead of connection. We need to deal with shame because it stifles our spirits and our creativity, and it eats away at our courage. And we need to deal with shame because it gets in the way of relationship and learning and change. I've learned and grown a lot since that week in Chicago, but when I was hooked by shame at the time, I wasn't able to learn more in that setting. I wasn't able to hear. I was caught up in the pain that I was feeling because my attention had been drawn to some things I'd been doing and some assumptions that I was making that got in the way of growth and change, that got in the way of my learning more about myself and the systems I was part of. When we respond to people or they respond to us, sharing with us the way our behaviors hurt or ignore or belittle them, when we respond by giving in to the shame we might feel, we center ourselves. We fall into patterns that stymie change. We reject the possibilities that have been offered to us when we've been asked to look at things differently. Remember the distinction between guilt and shame. that Walter shared a little earlier. A guilt response to a mistake or a bad action might be, oh, I did that bad thing. I should change that or learn more about that. A shame response would be more like, oh, I did that bad thing. I am such a bad person. I will never change. Brené Brown says that guilt can motivate change. Guilt helps us reconcile our choices with our values. It is appropriate to be called on our behavior. When our neighbors and friends choose to share with us ways that what we're saying or things we're not noticing affect and harm them, we are not being told we are bad people. We are being told that the things we're doing aren't great and could change. When we're asked to do things differently, if we're asked well, we are not being shamed. We are being asked to be curious. When we are asked to be accountable for the impact of our actions, we are not being shamed. We are being asked to be responsible. We are not being told we are bad people. We are being asked to grow, to live out our values and to value our relationships over our own perfection. Friends, we are not called to be perfect. We are called to be kind. We are not called to be flawless. We are called to be loving. We are not called to never make mistakes. We're called to try to build justice every day. We are not called to be invulnerable. We are called to be connected and in relationship. Would you take just a deep breath for a moment and let that out? That's a lot. I've thrown a lot at you today. A lot for your heart, maybe, and for your mind. It's okay. We are stuck so often in oughts and shoulds. I should already know this. I ought to be better at this. I shouldn't make those mistakes. We're caught in those shoulds and oughts, those permanent states for ourselves. And when we look at ourselves, when we pay attention to our hearts and our reactions to things, we can learn over time what pushes us to that place. What pushes us to that place? And we can choose. We can choose to let go of those oughts and embrace where we are with curiosity, with possibility, with hope, with love, and hear how our neighbors and our kin are inviting us into deeper relationship. My colleague, the Reverend Dawn Cooley, created a litany of wholeheartedness that I want to share with you today to finish this sermon time. You have some work to do in this. I'm going to invite you to say these words. We let go of who we ought to be. Say that, please. We let go of who we ought to be and embrace who we are. We let go of who we ought to be and embrace who we are. Try that. Beautiful, chaotic imperfection. I love you. So I'm going to say a line, and that's your response, okay? I'll say it with you so you don't have to remember. Because there have been times when shame has crushed our ability to be wholehearted, we let go of who we ought to be and embrace who we are. Because we have not always had the courage to be imperfect, we let go of who we ought to be and embrace who we are. Because we have struggled to have compassion for ourselves or others, we let go of who we ought to be and embrace who we are. Because we have been afraid of our own vulnerability, we let go of who we ought to be and embrace who we are. Because we are sometimes too scared to live authentically, we let go of who we ought to be and embrace who we are. Because we want to be wholehearted people, confident in our worthiness and our belonging, we let go of who we ought to be and embrace who we are. And who we are, friends, is beautiful, is wonderful, is radically imperfect, is really messy a lot of the time, and is great. and is okay. May it be so. Will you join your imperfect and glorious voices together? All of us have imperfect voices, glorious voices together as we sing our closing song, Wo Ya Ya. We are going, heaven knows where we're going, but we will get there. Will you please rise in body or spirit? We are going, heaven knows where we are going. We know we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there. We know we will. It will be hard, we know, and the road will be muddy and rough, but we'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get there. We know we will.
Thank you, Reverend Ian. So prior to sharing the congregational news, I did want to take this opportunity to thank all the many people that help organize and deliver our service this morning. From the folks on the AV team, to our hospitality team, our greeters and ushers, the folks who help set up and take down the tables for our coffee hour after service, and all of you for being here and continuing to strengthen our community. Thank you. Well, there's not much in the way of congregational news that I need to share. I'll share one thing, but there is our monthly bulletin and our weekly newsletter and the back of your order of service that gives you lots of information about things that may be coming up and things that are going on. But I did just want to let folks know this past Thursday, Galilee Center in Mecca in the eastern Coachella Valley distributed backpacks filled with school supplies to K through 12th grade students. And so a big thank you to all of you who donated backpacks and supplies, contributed to our July Share the Plate for Galilee Center to purchase more school supplies, and to those of you who went to the Galilee Center this past week to fill and distribute the backpacks, which we all know will help the students start the new year well prepared. Thank you. Okay. And so we will now extinguish the chalice as we say these words on the screen above. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
I also want to say thank you to Malcolm for some wonderful music, and to all our piano players every week. Some weeks we tell them, this is the theme, you've got to pick this music and that music. And other weeks we say, pick some beautiful music. And week after week they step up and just provide us with great beauty and great inspiration, so thank you. I want to close today with the words of my colleague, the Reverend Wayne Arneson. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone. Go in peace, my friends, to love and serve the world.